I get emails every day. I get emails every day from Africans who want to return home. And I want to give them countries other than Ghana because everybody's going to Ghana. So Ghana's getting crowded and we love Ghana. But you got 50 plus other countries in Africa that can also benefit from the education and the economic stability of the American African. In 1974, here in America, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who was a trilateral and a member of the Rockefeller camp, he penned what was known as the National Security Study Memorandum 200, which I recommend anyone to read. You can get it online. And it was a population control security document. And in this document, he listed about a dozen African countries that America needs to target for population control. And ironically, almost every country that he named in 1974, we're now 47 years later, almost 47 years later in December, almost every country he named in NSSM 200, this National Population Control Security Study, almost every African country named ended up with a tremendous HIV/AIDS crisis. White Jesus. White Jesus still dictates the spiritual life of African people. I'm not talking about Christianity. I have no problem with Christianity. I have a problem with the imagery used to represent the savior of Christianity. Jesus Christ was not white. It has been proven, and I can prove it. He was not a white man. But no matter where I go, if I'm in Kenya, if I'm in Ghana, if I'm in Nigeria, if I'm in Lesotho, if I'm in Gambia, if I'm in Senegal, wherever I go on the continent, God is still white. That is a problem. It's the same thing in America. It's the same thing in Jamaica. It's the same thing in Cuba. Wherever you go, God is still white. How can we expect to liberate African children while we're teaching them that their deity looks like their enemy? If Black children are going to be taught that their deity looks like their enemy, why would they ever develop the courage necessary to resist white supremacy if God himself is a white supremacist? Test 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Our brothers and sisters across the ocean. My name is Dr. Umar Ifatunde. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology, certified school psychologist, certified school principal, former child and family therapist, author, Pan-Africanist, and currently in a process of building an independent school here, which will be the first of its kind in the United States of America. The Honorable Frederick Douglass and Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey Elementary School and later high school. So on the topic of Pan-Africanism today, I would first say that three of the ancestors that have resonated with me, of all those who were included on the promotional poster, was Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, and of course, Samora Machel of Mozambique. And I'll just briefly speak to what stands out for me with all three of those great ancestors. And then I want to speak more to issues of Pan-Africanism as it relates in the modern context, because all three of those ancestors and all of the ancestors on the poster, they were about work and they were about seizing the present moment to make a better future for African people. And so I would be remiss in my responsibility to them if I didn't speak to some of the issues that we as African people throughout the diaspora, back home on the continent and out here in the wilderness of North America, if I didn't speak to the things that we need to do to make sure that Pan-Africanism becomes what it needs to be off of paper. And so when I think of Thomas Sankara, just to begin with him, I think you have a giant of African leadership when you look at the inclusion of women. Thomas Sankara, he probably more than most leaders, African leaders globally or on the continent, sought to include women, not only in his administration, but also within the cultural atmosphere of his country. He encouraged them to run for office. He appointed them to run for office. He made it illegal for child mutilation, female mutilation, infanticide, the murdering of female babies, and so forth and so on. he put an end as much as he could to all of that. And I think when you talk about the inclusion of African women and the respect that is due to our sisters, I think Thomas Sankara, without question, was a trailblazer as it relates to the inclusion of African women in our struggle, in our world, and outside of the home and within the society. So he is always an iconic figure when it comes to giving African women the dignity that they are entitled to. And of course, in dealing with the month of October, Queen Mother Yaa Asantewaa of Ghana was born in transition in the month of October, as well as Queen Mother Madam Demina of the great Marcus Garvey movement, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and African Communities League. She also made her transition in the month of October. So it's always good to make sure we include those lady Pan-Africanists who also made a great contribution to the work. So on the front of women's rights, Thomas Sankara stands out to me as a giant. And then on the other side, we also have to learn from some of the tragedies. I think that Thomas Sankara's assassination by his one-time best friend speaks to the treachery. It speaks to the disloyalty, and it speaks to betrayal that a lot of our leaders have had to deal with, many of whom were also betrayed by close comrades, if in fact not best friends. The fact that Blaise Compaoré actually helped bring about the coup that would bring Thomas Sankara into power, and then later would also give birth to the coup that would remove him from power, I think is very telling of how some of us have been so inoculated with that European need to dominate, that European Machiavellianism that has found its way into the African psyche. I think the Thomas Sankara tragedy of his assassination speaks to how even in African leadership on the continent and around the world, we saw the same thing here in America with El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X, one of our great Pan-Africanists here in the States, who was also undermined and betrayed by people who he trusted. I think that's something that we're always going to have to deal with. So many of our great leaders were betrayed by people who they trusted. Patrice Lumumba is another one. Amilcar Cabral set up by comrades, and the list goes on and on and on. And so I think that that's something that we're going to continue to grapple with, especially since the European has inoculated so many of us with this belief that there can only be one leader, as opposed to all of us working together to provide our people with the necessary leadership that's needed to pull all of us into the 21st century as an independent race of people. So those are the two things that stand out most for me when I think of Thomas Sankara. And then I think to an extent his naivete, because he didn't think that Blaise could do something like that. You know, many of his friends warned Thomas Sankara that Blaise was planning his overthrow. But Thomas was very, very patient with it. He never really took any action to stop the coup that so many in his inner circle felt certain would happen. And it in fact did happen. And I think part of the reason he resisted for so long is the pain and the hurt that goes along with recognizing someone you love and trust could be capable of doing something like that to you. And of course, in recent events, we learned that just this month, if memory serves me correctly, that Blaise Compaoré and the others who were involved in the execution of Thomas Sankara, they're finally being brought to trial. And I believe that trial has started in Burkina Faso this month right now. I read somewhere that Blaise is not going to actually physically attend the trial, so it will be held in absentia, at least for him. So that whole story, you know, which is quite old now, but, you know, never irrelevant, it's still a very much a current event in Burkina Faso. So I'm very interested in looking to see what will come of that case and if Blaise Compaoré will actually be convicted for the role that he played in the assassination of Thomas Sankara. When I move over to Julius Nyerere, obviously he lived a full life, a long life, a very celebratory life, an academic, a journalist, a teacher, you know, a leading Pan-Africanist. He helped bring about that unification of Zanzibar and Tanganyika, going on to be president of Tanzania. He would be like a model statesman for Pan-Africanists. When Milton Obote was overthrown in Uganda, he gave him safe haven in Tanzania. Of course, he went to war with Idi Amin, which ultimately led to Idi Amin's overthrow in Uganda. But I think Julius Nyerere was a great statesman. He did for the people of Tanzania what they needed at the time when he existed. Very practical, very prudent, very strategic, but very realistic he was. He didn't have to deal with the treachery per se that Thomas Sankara had to deal with. He didn't meet with the same fate, but just a great statesman overall. When I think of Julius Nyerere in terms of the oratory, in terms of the charisma, the personality, the education, the ability to bring brothers and sisters together in order to achieve a collective outcome for the people, the ability to subvert the tribal issues for a larger and greater goal of African unification, both within and without Tanzania, I think resonates with me very strongly when I think of that ancestor's contribution. And when we move on to Samora Machel, again, another great Pan-Africanist assassinated. Of course, the conclusion of his life story is still an unwritten book, because you have arguments that say he was murdered by the South Africans. You have arguments that says he was murdered by the Americans. Other arguments that say the plane crash that ended his life may have actually been caused by Russia. Some say it could have been caused by Russia working with the South Africans. But no matter how you look at it, I think it's pretty much an assassination, as so many people had concluded that it would be. But here was a brother who I think his contribution reminds me much of like Chris Ani in the Republic of South Africa, in that he physically participated in the liberation war. So when we look at our Pan-Africanist leaders, you have your statesmen, like such as a Julius Nyerere, you have your innovators like a Thomas Sankara, but then you have your revolutionary liberators, the ones who actually picked up guns and fought in the bush for the liberation of their country. And Samora Machel would definitely be one who goes on that list of revolutionary liberators from a militaristic standpoint, being in the army of Mozambique, working his way up through the army, earning the trust of his comrades and his soldiers and his countrymen and countrywomen. And then, of course, the great Eduardo Mondlane, who was assassinated, which led to the road through which Samora Machel would take to ultimately become president of Mozambique. And of course, Eduardo himself may have met with foul play and betrayal within the ranks when he was murdered, when a book bomb that was mailed to him had exploded in his face. But with Samora Machel, you get that general, that fighter, that army man who's not willing to compromise the respect or the independence of his country for nothing. Even when South Africa invaded Mozambique, he sent troops to the border and they resisted and they pushed back. Very much a military man, very much an alpha man. But I think he had the perfect balance of military tactician with theoretical and practical statesman. And I think Samora Machel would be a very great personality for a lot of our young people to study, along with the others. But because he actually served in armed combat towards the liberation of Mozambique, I think that adds a special area of diversity for him. Whereas if you look at Tanzania, there wasn't necessarily a protracted armed struggle as you had with Mozambique. And so I think that, his life story is serves as a very good example for young Africans around the world to study, especially those who are more inclined to the revolutionary struggle from a militaristic standpoint, the Dedan Kimathis, the Amilcar Cabrals, the Chris Hanis, and others who actually picked up the gun and actually fought for liberation in their country. So those are the three that I picked out. They've resonated me for quite some time. They've been heroes of mine since my youth. And so I wanted to definitely pay respect to them and all the others who are on the poster as well. Of course, I would probably take a little issue with Muammar Gaddafi. I don't really see him as a Pan-Africanist per se, because I don't see him as an African. I see him as an Arab who may have had African blood, who did some good things that he should be celebrated for. But I think there was a lot of opportunism as it relates to the work that he did within the mother continent. With that being said, I want to talk about some issues with Pan-Africanism, things that have to be discussed if we are ever going to become the vanguard for our people. And so, number one, I think the biggest challenge for Pan-Africanism going forward is that we need global operational unity that has not yet been achieved. Of course, we know the African Union has determined many years ago that Africans living outside the diaspora represent the sixth region of the African Union, the sixth region. But we really haven't seen much work done on the sixth region from a practical standpoint. There's a lot of ideology, there's a lot of theory, there's a lot of planning, but very little practical gain has been made since the African Union declared Africans in the diaspora to be a sixth union. And also looking at the African Union within Africa, because it has not yet become officially a United States of Africa, where the decisions that are made in Parliament are binding on all of the member states. I think it undermines the power and the influence of the African Union when any one country, a member of the AU, can just unilaterally decide that they're not going to follow or uphold or support a particular decision that the African Union has made. So what you get is a lot of voluntary compliance with different mandates from the African Union, but you don't get any compulsory compliance with the mandates of the African Union. And I think one of the reasons why we haven't seen the African Union move towards a United States of Africa where the various countries are federated is, number one, the Western power structure doesn't want that. The Western power structure wants all African nations to answer to them, to answer to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, to answer to France, and answer to the UK, and answer to the States. They do not want to have another authority separate from them that African leaders would have to submit to. And that is what the African Union needs to be. That's what we need it to be. But of course, the West will work as hard as they can to make sure that never happens. But be that as it may, obviously, we do see some progress. I believe on the continent now, there is a move towards a continental passport for Africans, more free trade areas. So I do see some progress on the continent that I'm very, very proud of, and I'm very good to see towards a continental Pan-Africanism. But at the same time, I think until the member states of the AU really have a serious conversation on creating that United States of Africa, which was the dream of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, and most of the Pan-Africanists saw the need for that. Julius Nyerere definitely saw a need for it. Sankara did as well, and even Samora Machel and everyone else on that poster. In fact, I don't know of a Pan-Africanist who didn't believe in the United States of Africa. And so I'm hoping that more is done to go into that direction. But with that being said, I think we also have to recognize that the debt that is owed by so many African countries to the former colonizers will also serve to undermine any governing authority that the African Union may have over its member states because of the structural adjustment programs that the World Bank, the IMF, France, and Britain often impose on African countries. And three of the major, structural adjustment programs that I think have served to undermine Africa, perpetuate this dependency on European nations, and also perpetuate poverty and a lack of development on the continent are, number one, the population control structural adjustment programs, where America, France, UK are actually demanding in exchange for loans that African nations work on controlling the amount of live births that take place in the country. We also see from the West a movement towards making sure Africa is safe for homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender behavior, which I have no doubt in saying that that is also being done to undermine population in Africa and population growth in Africa, which America has always considered to be a major issue. And of course, they're not talking about the population of white people because white people are a global minority. They're not talking about the population of Indians and Chinese because Indians and Chinese don't take orders from America. They're talking about African people whenever they talk about population growth. And I think that structural adjustment program of controlling live birth in Africa, as well as promoting abortion, promoting hysterectomy, and of course, promoting homosexuality on the African continent, all of those things are definitely aimed at controlling the numbers on the African continent. This whole notion that there's not enough space in the world for more people is totally nonsense. The reason they want to control the numbers in Africa is so that they have even fewer Africans who can resist the exploitation of European conquerors who come in to steal resources without paying market rate for those resources. In 1974, here in America, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who was a trilateral and a member of the Rockefeller camp, he penned what was known as the National Security Study Memorandum 200, which I recommend anyone to read. You can get it online. And it was a population control security document. And in this document, he listed about a dozen African countries that America needs to target for population control. And ironically, almost every country that he named in 1974, we're now 47 years later, almost 47 years later in December, almost every country he named in NSSM 200, this National Population Control Security Study, almost every African country named ended up with a tremendous HIV/AIDS crisis, okay, or they have developed a burgeoning LGBTQ rights movement. So I don't think that's no coincidence at all. And then 6 years later, in 1980, President Jimmy Carter signed another population control study, which was known as Global 2000, which basically concluded that America must take the lead in controlling population growth around the planet, and especially in Africa. And basically the conclusion of Global 2000 was that America needs to control the amount of Africans being born on the continent so that they can exploit the resources much more effectively. And again, I recommend that brothers and sisters read both of those policy documents, because in order to understand America's foreign agenda in Africa, in order to understand foreign affairs of the United States as it relates to the mother continent, you have to understand NSSM 200, you have to understand Global 2000, and you have to understand how addicted America is into controlling and ultimately shrinking the number of brothers and sisters on the African continent. The second structural adjustment program has to do with the interest rate on the loans. Now, other people have said this, and I'm saying it again. The more loans that Africa takes out from white folk, the worse off Africa will be. We have been taking loans out since the end of colonization. And in many respects, we've gotten better. And in other respects, we haven't. And that is because the interest that the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, France and the UK, the interest rate that they charge African nations for this loan, these loans are so egregious, so enormous, so fantastic that you can never pay them back. And so I think that the time has come, the time has been come and gone for African leaders to unite. And this is another reason why we need an United States of Africa on one accord to say we are no longer paying back the loan. Most of the money that African leaders pay off to these European creditors, colonizers, creditors, the new word for colonizer, development is the new word for colonization. But the monies that is sent back to the European nations and America to pay off these loans is only financing the interest. In other words, Africa's loan debt is not shrinking. It is remaining the same and getting greater because you're only financing the interest off the loan. The principal is never being touched. And of course, this is the way that the white powers have set it up to make sure you are forever in debt to them. Africa has to stop taking loans. And one of the things I love so much about Thomas Sankara's plan was that he attempted to do just that. As much as he could, he eliminated any dependency for loans and outside handouts from the European countries because he knew that Burkina Faso would end up owing them more than anything that they return, and this whole thing of loans is absolutely ridiculous when you just look at the history of colonization on the mother continent and how you're actually paying back people who have robbed you of tens of thousands, the equivalent of tens of thousands of years of resources, and they are still robbing Africa of tens of thousands of years worth of resources. Although colonization was not tens of thousands of years, when you look at the extrapolation of the resources, you're getting just that. Africa is home to most of the untapped oil, most of the untapped natural gas in this world, most of the untapped minerals, and we're literally giving them these minerals for pennies on a dollar. And at the same time, we're financing long-term loan debts that we had never helped to pay off, which speaks to an issue of political integrity in Africa, which I'll touch on briefly in a second. But the third structural adjustment program that I would like to speak on, one is population control. I spoke to that. The other is the interests. And the third is the free economy provision that the white power structures of the world impose on African nations who take their loan money. In other words, they dictate a steady diet of free economy in Africa. So when we hear the word free economy, a lot of people don't know what that means. A free economy means you cannot protect any of your homegrown native built industries. So if you are in Senegal and Senegal has its own salt, Senegal doesn't want anybody else's salt coming into Senegal because that is a homegrown industry that they can protect because they have their own salt. Or you go to Malawi and Malawi has its own tea. So Malawi doesn't want another country bringing their tea into Malawi because they grow their own. And since they grow their own, they can build a homegrown tea industry. They can employ people. They can distribute the tea. And so the tea becomes a national product that they can control. But the white power structure comes in and say, if you take this loan money, not only are we going to charge you 1,000% interest, not only are we going to force you to promote homosexuality, abortion, and hysterectomy and birth control in your country, but on top of that, you cannot protect your indigenous economic markets. You're not going to protect your tea. You're not going to protect your salt. You're not going to protect your poultry markets, your fish markets. The white businesses can all come into your country and compete with your national industries. That's why free economy in Africa is a disaster. But it's nothing you can do about it as long as the heads of state keep on signing these contracts, these loan contracts with the parasitic European nations of the world. If I have an industry that I can protect, why should I be forced to allow your companies to come in and compete with my homegrown industry? They can refine it quicker than I can. They can produce it quicker than I can, and they can sell it cheaper than I can, for reasons all due to colonization and the arrested development that is caused in many African nations. So basically, allowing European countries to come in and compete with homegrown economic markets in Africa leads to what? Economic sabotage. And that's why whenever you travel around Africa, you see African nations importing goods that they can grow and produce. If you can grow and produce tea, why are you paying for tea? If you can grow and if you can refine and sell your own salt, why are you importing salt? If you can produce your own textiles or clothing or cheap goods, why are you importing it by the shiploads from China? And the reason is they have to compete with European items, which ultimately sabotages the African market in that particular country. You close it down because you're not making enough money from it. You can't pay your workers. And now you're dependent on what? Handouts, okay, and also imports from other countries. Paying for stuff you should be growing on your own. And one of the things that bothered me as well when I'm in a continent is when I see all this foreign labor being given these contracts to build infrastructure in African countries. And I'm saying to myself, why are the Chinese laying the roads? Okay. Why do I see different races in Africa building the new buildings and making the ships and laying the roads? And I'm saying, if you have universities, why aren't your university students laying the roads? Why aren't they building the ships? Why aren't they creating the new buildings? Because if you have university students who you claim are being trained to do this, but you keep on farming this out to the Chinese, or farming it out to the Arabs, or farming it out to the Europeans, or farming it out to the East Indians, in essence, what you're saying is you do not trust your universities. You do not trust your universities to produce the type of student who could build up Africa for herself, as opposed to depending on foreign labor. Now, getting back to the political piece, I support democracy. I support African democracy. But I would say for Africa, the same thing I would say for Black America. I would say it for Black England. I would say it for Black Canada. I would say it for Black South Africa. If voting could change anything, voting would be illegal. One of the biggest con games ran on American Africans since the end of slavery, and it's been 155 years here since the 13th Amendment, is the belief that we could change our reality by voting. It is my prayer and it is my hope that brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa do not think that you're going to change the condition of Africa through voting alone. If voting could change things, voting would be illegal. The reason the European pushes democracy, and I support democracy, but not the European version. But the reason Europeans love to go to Africa and push democracy is democracies can be manipulated so that the person that the European power desires to be the head of that state can be put in that office. Okay, they manipulate the counting of the votes. They manipulate turnout. They manipulate everything in a democracy. Even here in the United States of America, most of the voting is not done in a fair way. They have ways of rigging the booths. They have ways of throwing out the votes. No election is done in a fair and transparent way, not in America and probably not anywhere else. So democracy is just a very fancy way for outsiders to meddle into the political reality of your country. And what we need to be focused on as African people is development more so than the democracy, because it doesn't matter who you vote for if they are being financed by white corporations, because that's what's happening. I'm seeing it in Africa where you have somebody running for president and this one represents this party and this one represents this party. And when you go and look at who's financing them, just like here with Black candidates in America, they have European interests financing them, Chinese interests financing them, Arab interests financing them. So African elections are starting to look like American elections, where the person running does not even offer any sincere solutions, because once they get in office, they have already sold themselves out to the Chinese or to the Arabs or to the Europeans. So we have to recognize that democracy is really distracting our people from the hard work that needs to be done. And added to that is the issue of a lack of political integrity, from the position that if I am a president of an African nation, and this holds true for most nations in the world, but we're talking about our continent. If I'm president of an African nation and I know that I can resuscitate my nation's economy without loans, but in order to do that, my people are going to have to go through 5, 10 hard years of struggle. They're going to have to going without some of the commodities that they're used to. They're going to have to deal with going without some of the luxuries that they would like for us to import for them. But in order to get where we need to be, in order to lay the groundwork for a truly independent nation that has more than just a flag and an anthem, but a truly politically and economically independent country that's liberated from European control, we are going to have to go through 5, 10 years of hard struggle. to get to where we need to be. But most people vote on popularity. So even if the president of my country is doing the right thing, if I don't feel comfortable, meaning if I don't feel comfortable, meaning that my life is going to be complicated because my leadership wants me to put up with a lot of inconveniences in order to liberate my country, I might rather vote for somebody else. And so what ends up happening in Africa as well as in the Caribbean is the real leaders are often viewed as if they didn't do a good job. And the leaders who are willing to just take out loan after loan after loan from the Europeans will look like they're more progressive when in fact they're leading that country into greater debt. And because most of the masses do not read, I don't care if you black, white, purple, if you live in Africa, the United States, or England, the masses do not read and they do not study politicians. They vote based on what they see and what they hear. So the greatest leader will require his people to put up with some inconveniences, whereas the leader who is not a visionary and just wants to appear progressive will put that country further and further into debt so he can say, I built that stadium, I built that hospital, I built those roads, I built those schools. Yes, you did, but at what cost? And so too often you get African leadership who is preparing for life after office while they are in office. I see the same thing in the Caribbean. You're not in office to liberate your country. You're not in office to economically empower your country. You're in office to set yourself up economically when you get out. And that's why the Chinese are so successful going throughout Africa and going throughout the Caribbean, paying off leadership with post-presidential hideaway bank accounts just for delivering them the contracts and the resources that they want. And so we have to do something with corruption. Now, let's be clear. Every country is corrupt. Every country is corrupt, most of them. You only hear about corruption when they deal with Africa. You never hear about the US government being corrupt, which it is, the French government being corrupt, which it is, the British government being corrupt, the Belgians are corrupt. They're all corrupt. You don't hear about their corruption. You only hear about corruption in Africa. But let us be honest. One of the reasons why you have corruption in Africa is because the European powers make sure you are corrupt. They intentionally set out to make sure heads of state do something illegal. So if they ever stop playing cat and mouse with the US, if they ever stop going along with the foreign agenda of the US, the UK, or France, they will be exposed as a thief, as a crook, as a humanitarian criminal, and they'll be ushered over to the International Criminal Court and locked up forever. Although, when they played ball with America, i.e. Charles Taylor, there was no problems as long as you did what we wanted you to do. But the minute you stopped doing what we wanted you to do, such as when Charles Taylor, one of the things he did was he started looking at whether or not Liberia should extend Firestone's rubber lease. And when he called into question whether or not Firestone should continue to have a monopoly on the rubber in Liberia, the next thing you know, he was brought up on charges at International Criminal Court. So again, the corruption is actually engineered from America, and they make sure that there's something corrupt in your background so they can destroy you when you stop carrying out their agenda. A few other things, because I see we're at the top of the hour, so I will go quick. For those of us in the diaspora, one of the things that we need is we need clear direction on state-backed investment opportunities. One of the issues with Africans in America and in the UK, in the Caribbean, Central and South America, we want to invest in Africa. We want to invest in Africa, but we cannot tell the difference between opportunities that are backed by the state versus opportunities that are backed by individuals whose backgrounds we cannot necessarily vet appropriately. So one of the things that the African Union should do, and one of the things that all of the African governments should do, is create a transparent packet of investment opportunities for Africans in the diaspora to be able to send funds back home to help alleviate Africa's dependency on China and on the white man, because the Chinese is not the black man's friend. China has never loved black people. They are only there to become the neo-colonizer. And it hurts my heart to see so many African countries just rolling out the red carpet for the Chinese, especially when you see how poorly Chinese treat African people in China. So we need a clear set of state-backed investment opportunities for the diaspora. I believe if we had that, we would be able to get a lot of Africans in the diaspora to send billions of dollars back home. And again, that would free up African nations from needing to depend on the white man for loans or Chinese for their handouts, which are actually loans themselves. Moving on from that, less dependence on foreign aid. I already talked about that. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank was created to keep Africa in an underdeveloped state. Democracy as a distraction. Chinese imperialism disguised as aid needs to stop. Self-serving leadership is a big problem in the entire diaspora from Africa to America. And the last thing I'm going to say is this, and I'll be quiet. We need an independent, global, Pan-African educational platform, online and in person. I always say that when I travel throughout the world, there's 4 things I see no matter where I go. Any black community, if I'm in the Caribbean, I see it. If I'm in Europe, I see it. If I'm in South America, I see it. In Canada, I see it. I saw it in Asia. I see it everywhere in Africa. Wherever you go in a black community on the planet Earth, I don't care where it is, from Alabama to South Africa, I could care less where it is, from Birmingham, England to Botswana. What are those 4 constants when you're dealing with African people? Number 1, white Jesus. White Jesus still dictates the spiritual life of African people. I'm not talking about Christianity. I have no problem with Christianity. I have a problem with the imagery used to represent the savior of Christianity. Jesus Christ was not white. It has been proven, and I can prove it. He was not a white man. But no matter where I go, if I'm in Kenya, if I'm in Ghana, if I'm in Nigeria, if I'm in Lesotho, if I'm in Gambia, if I'm in Senegal, wherever I go on the continent, God is still white. That is a problem. It's the same thing in America. It's the same thing in Jamaica. It's the same thing in Cuba. Wherever you go, God is still white. How can we expect to liberate African children while we're teaching them that their deity looks like their enemy? If black children are going to be taught that their deity looks like their enemy, why would they ever develop the courage necessary to resist white supremacy if God himself is a white supremacist? So we have to do away with the white image of Jesus. It is suffocating Africans all over the world. Like I said, everywhere. That's number 1. Number 2, the economy of the black community is totally controlled by aliens. Right here in Philadelphia, where I live, the economy in the black community is dominated by Koreans, Arabs, and Europeans. I'll go to an African country, it'll be the same way. I can go to Bermuda or Bahamas in the Caribbean, same way. I can go to Europe, same way. Wherever you go in the world, African people do not dominate their own economy. That is a global reality. We can never expect to be independent and free as long as we keep letting alien races dictate our dollars. So that's number 2. White Jesus, non-African domination of our economics. Third reality, mass incarceration of black males. Mass incarceration of black males is a global phenomenon. Wherever I go, the black man is disproportionately incarcerated, which is to say he is disproportionately economically marginalized and castrated. If the black man cannot take care of his family, he's going to commit crime. That is a human scientific fact. So whenever you see a black criminal, you automatically know that somebody is being economically disenfranchised. And the last and final of the 4 consistencies amongst all African reality in the world is education. Education. I am an educator. I'm a school psychologist. I'm a school principal. It hurts my heart when I travel throughout the continent, when I travel throughout the Caribbean, South America, here in America even, most African children in the world, Caribbean African, American African, continental African, European African, Australian African, they are being taught by white people or Chinese or Jews. They're being taught by alien races, or the curriculum itself is an alien curriculum. In Africa, a lot of the curriculum is still an improved version of the curriculum that was given during colonization? Why have we not overhauled the curriculum on the continent? Don't get me wrong. You have places in Africa where the science curriculum is second to none. The engineering is second to none. But when it comes to the African child knowing who they are, knowing themselves in their history and their culture, which is necessary to develop pride, I see very few schools in the world where Black children, Black African children, are being taught who they are as Black African people. And I'll end with a quote from the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, who said, "Without confidence in yourself, you will be twice defeated in the race of life. But with confidence, you have won even before you have started." And I would also say that this whole COVID crisis, brothers and sisters, was engineered by the West for 3 reasons. COVID was hit for 3 reasons. Number one, to get rid of as many African elderly in the world as possible. COVID was a death bomb for elderly populations. One of the reasons Italy was hit so hard, because Italy is home to one of the oldest European populations in the world, and that was a test site for the COVID for the COVID virus. So they want to get rid of elderly Black people. Africa is home to the oldest human beings in the world. And according to the United Nations Population Bureau, the elderly population in Africa is going to swell, which is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with elders, but it is for European capitalism. Why do they have a problem with old people? That's why so many elders in America have succumbed to COVID. If you look at the Black people who are dying from the disease, most of them are above the age of 65. Why do they want to get rid of African elderly on the continent, mostly women, or African elderly anywhere in the world? 2 reasons. Under white capitalism, you are only relevant if you can do one of 2 things. You can work and produce the goods that capitalism will sell, or you will buy the goods that capitalism makes. They must exploit your labor, or they must exploit your dollar, your currency. The problem with elders is what? Elders don't work anymore. They're too old. They don't work. So you can't exploit their labor. Elders have also learned how to live on less than what is necessary. So you can't really exploit their currency because they're on a fixed income, and many of them depend on the community and the society for their sustenance. So because they cannot exploit the labor of elderly, and because they cannot exploit the currency of elderly, they would rather kill off the elderly. And that's why you see so many elders within the African community, in the diaspora in particular, but to some extent on the continent as well, have succumbed to COVID. And I'm so thankful for African leaders who refused the testing and the vaccination, because they're giving you the virus in the tests, they're giving you the virus in the vaccination, and they're giving you the virus in the society. Rest in peace to John Magufuli, former president of Tanzania, who exposed this when he tested an animal, a plant, and a piece of fruit. I think 2 of the 3 came down positive for COVID. He said, how can a piece of fruit and an animal have the COVID virus? And he exposed that the test kits that were being sent into Africa were already rigged to produce a false positive. So I'm so glad that so many African nations rejected the COVID vaccination, and I hope they continue to do so. And I'll end on that note: Black African power, Pan-Africanism or perish. Used as a vehicle for African unity, it has to prioritize it. I think that given the economic stranglehold that the Western powers has on the economies and policies of many African nations, servicing the debt and remaining in good standing with the former European colonizer has too often become the priority of many presidential administrations on the mother continent. And I think that a lot of African heads of state are stuck in survival mode. They are trying to survive as opposed to thrive. And we have to move from survival to where we can thrive as a people. So I think they simply need to prioritize it. I don't think there's enough prioritization of continental unity or global African unity for that matter. And then you have to add to that in many countries, we have still yet to overcome the petty tribal differences that exist. So when I travel, if I'm in Nigeria, it's very easy to pick up on the tense situation that still exists so many years after the Civil War there between the Yoruba and the Igbo, you see. So if I'm in South Africa, I can still pick up on the tenseness between the Zulu and the Xhosa community. So it's like, okay, how do you create continental operational unity when you haven't even created national operational unity? So, for example, one of the best strategies that politicians use to get elected is to exploit tribal differences for political advantage. You see this all the time. And unfortunately, a lot of our people play into this because they say, hey, if I am of the Maasai, even if the candidate running for office is not a good candidate, but he's Maasai and I'm Maasai, so I'm going to vote. And the other guy might be Kikuyu in Kenya, and he says, yes, I'm Kikuyu, and the guy running for president is Kikuyu. I don't think he's going to be a good president, but I would rather someone of my tribe get the office as opposed to someone from another tribe. So you have this petty consciousness, and this is global, by the way. It's global. It's over here in the States as well. You have this petty consciousness that says, I want my tribe to be the ruling tribe, even though I know they're not the best person for this country. And that's why Pan-Africanism, and as Pan-Africanists, we have to constantly emphasize the we first and the us first mentality. The race must come first, not the tribe, not the religion, not the community, not the profession, not the Masonic Lodge, but African people. Vote for what is best for African people. Make policies that are best for African people. And we don't see that. You still see the rule of tribal loyalty in Africa and throughout the African diaspora. The Honorable Marcus Garvey said that we are cursed with petty differences. And from a political standpoint, I agree with that. Our petty differences are what has allowed the European to come into Africa and the Chinese and do what they are doing. And in order to change that, African Union collectively and the African states individually must begin to prioritize a race-first Pan-African paradigm that says we will respect each other's national origins. I hate to use the word tribe because it has racist origin. I'd rather use the word nation. We will respect our various ethnic nations, our ethnic nationalities. We will learn from each other. Okay, we can participate with each other. But at the end of the day, let us make decisions that are good for the Zulu and the Xhosa. Let us make decisions that are good for the Kikuyu and the Maasai. Let's make decisions that are good for the Wolof and the Mandingo. We have to get to a point where we're making decisions that are best for the race and not what's best for our tribe. The greatest criticism of Pan-Africanism of the past 50 years, at least, has been the failure to achieve economic and political solidarity on a global level. Philosophically, we are sound. Theoretically, we are sound. We are principally sound. But when it comes to the actual practical implementation of global and political strategies to improve the lives of all African people, we are struggling. And I think it's because we don't come together enough to talk about the practical aspect of nation building, the practical aspects of international solidarity. And to a large point, I do think that we are at the mercy of African heads of state, African government and parliament, because there's so much they can do to facilitate that they are not doing it. For example, dual citizenship. Ghana is getting crowded. And the reason Ghana is getting crowded with Africans from the diaspora is Ghana is the only country that I'm aware of at present that offers dual citizenship and actually has a pathway, a official policy that allows Africans in the diaspora to achieve citizenship in Ghana. You have over 50 countries in Africa, but you only have one that is willing to recognize Africans in the diaspora as citizens of its nation. So that is a real practical step that a lot of African nations can take that they haven't taken it. Why aren't more African nations offering dual citizenship? We understand His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I put aside Shashamani as a territory in Ethiopia for Africans in the diaspora to return home to. But since his death in 1975, the Ethiopian government in almost 50 years has done very little to create a home in Ethiopia for Africans in the diaspora. Why is this important? It's important because American Africans have the capital that the continent of Africa can use to help build herself up more quickly. By bringing us in, you can keep the Chinese out. And let me also say this. There's also some concern, and it's legitimate concern, that if you let American Africans and European Africans and Canadian Africans into Africa, you can get a situation where they might try to take over politically. You can also get a situation where there will be cultural conflicts like the ones we saw in Liberia when the emancipated enslaved Africans from America went back home. Well, to that, I would say we need to have a very good screening process to decide who gets to come into your country and apply for dual citizenship. You just don't let anybody in. You need to do some background. You need to have an entire department of repatriation. Every African nation should have a department of repatriation that investigates and studies and trains and help people prepare to come back to Africa. And the other point I will make, because I do think the fear of political takeover is a real one, whether it is organic, mean it just naturally happens, or the FBI or the CIA send agents into Africa to sow discord between returning Africans and indigenous continental Africans. I personally have no problem agreeing to a provision that says we cannot run for office. That first generation expatriates cannot run for office. I don't see a problem with that. If I'm just moving to Africa, why am I running for office? I have to learn the culture. I have to learn the language. I have to get my lifestyle up. I got to take care of my children. Why would I be looking to run for office? So I have no problem with first or second generation returning Africans not be allowed to run for office as a way to prevent the CIA or the MI6 from trying to infiltrate the politics of Africa through the repatriation movement. But we need more African nations to offer dual citizenship. We need more African nations to show us what the investment opportunities are. We need more African nations to be more vocal with Americans in the West about what opportunities exist, because we're ready.